Okay, so we ended on Thursday with Cardinal Mazarin. Cardinal Mazarin is the gentleman selected by Richelieu to succeed him when he died. So Mazarin will be the chief minister for Louis XIII in the remainder of his lifetime, which is unfortunately relatively brief. Louis the 13th is going to die unexpectedly early, and his son, Louis the 14th, will take the throne at the age of this many. He was 5. He was this many. Okay? That is clearly far too young, younger even than his father, who was 9 when he took the throne. So Mazarin and Louis's mother will effectively rule France while Louis is yet a young boy. Shortly after Dad's death and Louis comes to the throne, there's a series of uprisings, rebellions all across France. These are called the Fronde. They're protesting royal power. They're saying taxes are too high, and it's all of the classes. It's the clergy, the nobility, the peasantry. Nobody's happy. A lot of it comes from the fact that there's no real strong central authority. A 5-year-old just isn't an effective king who can maintain control. At one point, the rioting is so bad in the streets of Paris that Louis and his mother and nurses and whatnot are all hustled into a carriage and rushed out of the city because they're fearing for their lives. If you think back to when you were young, think back to some of your earliest memories in your life. Have you got some? Most likely, those are centered around really strong emotions. Great happiness or joy. Great sadness. Great fear. Am I right? And you don't really remember details so much as the sense of terror. When I was 5, my grandmother had had a stroke, and my family was cleaning out her house. We're up in Broken Bow, Nebraska. So my sister, who was 12 years older than I am, and Mom and Dad are upstairs cleaning out closets and the bedrooms and stuff, and they left me alone downstairs in the living room. Now, this was so long ago that there was only one TV in the house, and I was watching it, and there was a cable. Okay? They used to have, before the days of cable, the networks would turn on the late movie, and then the late movie. Well, someone had left me unattended in front of the television, and I was watching the Late Show on CBS, and it was Carrie, the Stephen King novel movie with the blood at the prom, and there was a bathtub and candles, and Mom was weird. Since then, I can do gory, I can do scary, I can't do suspenseful. I can't do screeching violins and suspense music, and can't do it. I don't remember details about the movie, but I remember being terrified, and I'm not a huge fan of the dark since then either. Okay? I don't know who finally found me. I know that they could not get me into the bathtub the next night. Yeah, I was never real thrilled about coming to homecoming either. Anyway, strong emotions make very strong memories. Louis XIV forever will associate fear for his life with this uprising and fleeing from Paris. Okay? That will stay with him. And for the rest of his life, he is not going to be a fan of the city of Paris. He will choose effectively to move his court out of Paris. Up to him, he would never have gone back to Paris again. That sense of dread, that sense of fear, that sense of powerlessness that was left in him as a 5-year-old boy Think about that chaos and turmoil and all of the sounds that would have been surrounding him. He grew up to be a very intelligent, very rational, very powerful man. But you never forget some of that early stuff. If you or you have a friend who's afraid of a clown or clowns, know somebody who's afraid of clowns, it probably comes from childhood. People who are afraid of dogs comes from early childhood. It's not a rational fear. Doesn't have to be. Okay. Ultimately, Cardinal Mazarin gets a lid on the rebellions and the Frondes and will guide Louis very effectively through his early years. In his 20s, when Louis is in his 20s, Mazarin will die, and Louis takes control. He becomes king in his own right. He truly becomes what we know as, doggone it, the Sun King. And that is S-U-N. Louis chooses as his symbol what is then the known center of the universe. Everything revolves around the sun. The sun gives life with its heat. Without the sun, everything is over. And Louis chooses that as his representation. Not the fleur de lis, the flower, the sun. Get too close, and it'll burn you up, right? Okay. That tells you something about Louis' perception of himself. And then from the video on Thursday, we learned that he once danced the role of Apollo, who is the sun god, right, in a ballet. Now, he was not a trained ballet dancer, but he's the king, so you can be sure that there weren't any subtweets going out during that performance. Who's this joker in the tights? That would have not ended well for you if you mocked the king, so I'm sure his performance was fabulous. Okay. Louis is, for us, in this chapter on absolutism, an absolute monarch. Philip II had a lot of power, and he ruled as an absolutist, but we know that he wasn't completely unfettered. Louis XIV is an absolute, divine right monarch. God chose him and gave him complete and total power. And he will build on Richelieu's work to make sure that he gets even more power. Okay, Richelieu, remember, it's clear back to Wednesday. He had stopped parts of the Edict of Nantes, stopped renewing them, right? No strongholds for the Huguenots, no private armies for them. He'd also said nobility, no castle walls, and no private armies, right? Louis XIV goes a step further. He says, no Edict of Nantes. It is not there anymore. Okay. He wipes it out. The Huguenots are still allowed to practice, but they've lost those civil rights that they had gotten. They lost those freedoms and those protections. Louis understands that to realize his dreams, he's going to need money in the treasury. And so he appoints a very smart finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Again, the French throwing in extra letters just for decoration. Colbert, not Colbert. Okay. Jean-Baptiste Colbert introduces into France something that you guys studied in Chapter 3, Section 5. It's an economic system used to enrich countries. Anyone? Mercantilism. Okay. Now, mercantilism isn't a totally new idea. Spain has been a mercantilist country since 1492. We're almost 200 years past that now. Not quite. 150. Somewhere in there. So France is going to send conquering armies and stuff over to North America, right? and occupy land and control it and set up like new little mini Frances like Spain did, right? Is that what they do? Is that what they do? Did you read the section? Where does France find its wealth in the mercantilist system? Oh my goodness, you guys are no fun when you don't read. Furs. Furs. It's only been a couple years since you had this. You would have had it in 8th grade. Remember the French fur trappers? Okay. I'm going to go really out on a limb. Can anybody name any famous French explorers? How about Marquette and Joliet? No? Okay. They trade in furs. The most profitable and most prolific fur for them is the beaver pelt. Beaver coats, beaver hats, everything is the rage all across Europe. They almost can't get their hands on enough beaver pelts. How do they get them? From their colonies, yes. So they just like pull the boat up on the shore and like, here, beaver, here, beaver. Now, they probably laid out twigs as bait, right? They trap them. They trap them. Now, to trap, you have to set the trap and wait. So to get very many, you have to set a lot of traps. So to get a lot of money, you're going to need a lot of beaver pelts, which means you're going to need a lot of trappers, right? So the French must send over like 100,000 fur trappers to blanket the woods of North America, right? No. No, they did it like the Spanish did. They sent over an army and they enslaved the natives and forced them to go out and trap the beaver pelts, right? No, that doesn't sound familiar? It's because it's not how it worked. They traded with the natives. They sent over some trappers who learned from the natives the most effective places to set their traps and how to trap them, how to harvest the pelts without damaging them. And then they would trade with the natives who were already trapping the beavers. So rather than coming over and dominating and oppressing the people who were already here, the French went about it very differently. They worked in concert with the natives to get what they needed. That's much less expensive. If you come over and you conquer and you dominate, you have to maintain that level of power. You have to maintain an army, and that costs money for wages and money for equipment and money for food, right? If you just send some people over to work alongside the people who are already here, much less expensive. Now, the French did do some colonization as well. In fact, outside of France, the largest French-speaking population is here in North America. Anybody know where? It was Canada. Can you be more specific? Quebec. Yes. The largest French-speaking population. Montreal is up there as well. Montreal. Okay. I want to talk to you about Louis's power, because it's the most significant thing about Louis XIV, is how he got his power, how he maintained his power. Okay? Louis understood this idea that I've introduced to you guys, the matter cannot be created or destroyed, power can't be created or destroyed idea. So he knew that if he was going to get more power for himself, for the monarchy, it had to come from somewhere. And for him, it came from everywhere. With some of the money that he's gotten from his mercantilist policies, he builds up a large army. Louis will fight a lot of foreign wars during his reign, and he's going to make a lot of profit in doing that. He's going to acquire territory, he's going to acquire treasure. It's going to be successful for him. More power. Louis is going to expand the bureaucracy. Do you know what bureaucracy means? Matt? Yeah, government. It's the structure of the government. Okay? Someone who works for the government is known as a bureaucrat. How does expanding the size of government make the king more powerful? It works like this. If in elementary school, when you took attendance each morning, did the teacher do a milk count? Find out how many of you were going to have white milk and how we're going to have chocolate milk each day? No? We used to do that. Okay. It mattered because the elementary schools had to have that delivered each day. So, Steph? Okay, hot lunch or cold lunch, so they know how to tell the kitchen to cook. All right. So if every day it's always Sean's job to get that, does Sean over time start getting a little bossy about it? You were supposed to check in with me and let me know which kind of lunch you were having. Come on, you're holding things up here, right? Gets a little snarky, starts throwing his weight around a little bit, right? And then what happens if Sean's sick? He gets chicken pox. He's gone for like a week. Uh-oh. Then there's a power struggle, right? Well, Noah says, well, Sean used to let me help. I would do the last half of the alphabet, and he would do the first, and then so I should get to do it. And then Cole's like, no. I always wrote the numbers down for him because he always made his twos backwards, and the lunch ladies got upset. And so, okay. Bureaucracy says, Sean, you count hot lunches. Cole, you count cold lunches. Cassidy, you have to go around and double check hot lunches. Steph, you go around and double check cold lunches. All four of you report your totals to both Michael and Cassie, and they verify that their sum total equals the total number of students in the classroom, and together they report their numbers to Jake, who turns them in to me. Who has the power now? Well, that one amount of power that originally was Jake's, or that originally was Sean's, when I just turned it into a bureaucratic thing, I took one person's power and divided it amongst 7. So they all have a little power. They feel kind of important. They have a job to do, but they have no real power, do they? This is what bureaucracy does. Okay? Takes the same amount of power and it spreads it out real thin over a whole bunch of people so that they all feel important but aren't. Okay? This is how it worked for Louis. So he expanded the bureaucracy. I'm working on a list of things that he does, right, to increase his power and limit the power of others. So, big army, foreign wars, expand the bureaucracy. All right. He creates a new office. He creates intendant. Intendant. This is a whole new group of people who've never had anything. They've never had power. They come from the middle class. Now, the middle class we know is educated, sometimes even better educated than the nobility. And some of the middle class are actually wealthier than the nobility because they've made money being merchants and shopkeepers and stuff. But they don't have any status. Socially, they don't matter. And that bothers them, that eats at them. Okay? They want power that doesn't come from money. Okay? So Louis creates intendant. He assigns them to go out and be his tax collectors. And he says, I'll pay you a percentage of what you collect. Well, did these people just become the world's most efficient and effective tax collectors? So if I'm going to pay you a percentage of what you collect, you're going to get every last penny out of every last person, aren't you? Because the more you collect, the more you earn. Make sense? Where do tax collectors have to go? Everywhere. Who do they talk to? Everyone. They are everywhere all the time. They know everybody's business. They are like spies in plain sight. Right? So they're collecting taxes from the poor, from the rich, from the clergy, from everybody. And they have power in doing so, don't they? Where'd they get that power from? The king. Louis XIV gave them that power. They now have newfound wealth. Where'd they get that? From the king. He lets them have it. Do the nobility respect them now? Ish. Maybe just a little bit. Partly because they're afraid of them. Because who are the intendants ultimately loyal to? The king. Because he gave them what they have. He gave them power and position and status. And so they will do anything for him, including report on interesting things that they see going on in the country that seem unusual and might be of concern to the king. He doesn't even have to ask. But should he ask, they would be most happy to do anything for him. Brilliant. He has created a whole new group of power holders that never existed before, who are completely loyal to him. Now, he gave them the position, but did he give them the power? Where'd they get their power from? The nobles who used to be the tax collectors and aren't anymore. So he took another chunk of power away from the nobility, created the intendants, who are middle class. They have no title. There's no heredity going on there. He's created a counterbalance. In this teeter-totter game of power, Louis is in the middle, of the nobility on one side and the intendant on the other. And Louis gets to decide how he wants to shift power. Smart guy, huh? He gets smarter. He requires the nobility to come and spend time with him. Now, he had decided he didn't like Paris, and he had heard about this wonderful palace built by Philip II in Spain. You remember what that was? The El Escorial. Okay. He says, oh, I hear that's a magnificent embodiment of his power, but I am the Sun King, and I deserve more. And so he builds himself a palace about 10 miles outside of Paris in a little tiny village where his dad had a hunting chateau. If you think hunting lodge, if I say hunting lodge, are you going to think log cabin and like a pot-bellied stove and campfire? And yeah. That's not how the king's hunting lodge was. I mean, this is like a little mini palace. Louis will completely revamp and renovate and turn this into a grand palace, one of the most opulent in all of Europe, and it is known after the town in which it sits, Versailles. Do not call this Versailles. I will be tempted to smack you with a glove and challenge you to a duel. Do not call it Versailles. Versailles. It is expensive for the nobility to go and live at Versailles. They have to pay for their transport. They have to be dressed up in fancy clothes every day. And for heaven's sakes, you wouldn't wear the same thing twice, would you, ladies? Goodness gracious me, no. You have to have your own attendants along with you to help you dress, and your own chambermaid and your own valet, and that's expensive. While you're there, you're right under the king's nose. You're not getting away with anything. If you were back home, you'd be living less expensively and able to talk about the king behind his back. Can't get away with that while you're there. Brilliant, right? and sucking money out of their pockets. And the less money you have, the less power you have. Okay? So required to be in attendance at court. And then, oh my goodness, the ridiculous, ridiculous ceremonies that he would require them to go through. 20-course dinners. 20-course dinners. Takes hours, and you're drinking the whole time. You got to go to the bathroom. You have to have the king's permission to leave the table. It would be rude to just get up and walk out. So you have to ask the king, can I go potty? People would not want to be gone from the king's presence for too long, so they turned Versailles, the whole beautiful palace, into essentially an outhouse. They would just go find a back staircase and get business done and then hurry back. So the place is gross. So Louis has latrines dug nice and close to the palace so that people will take their business outside. Well, he used that as a power tool as well. Let's say you had angered the king in some way. He would order you a shift in apartments within Versailles. He would have you moved to the apartments right near the latrines. Now it gets hot in France in the summertime, and it gets humid in France in the summertime, and they do not have electricity and air conditioning. So what do you do to keep your palace cool? Why, you throw open the windows, and you, who have been repositioned in the rooms adjoining the outdoor latrines, are aware of how upset the king is with you every time you breathe. Your clothes, your bedding, everything reeks of human waste. Louis could send a message to you pretty quick, couldn't he? Brilliant. Brilliant. My favorite ridiculous ceremony is called the levee. The book does not do this justice in terms of ridiculousness. I want to come back to the levee. But before I do, I want to mention one of these wars. The War of the Spanish Succession. Okay? Louis lives a long time. He lives a long time. He lives so long that his grandson has become the heir to the Spanish throne. And when the king dies, his grandson, Philip V, is going to become king of Spain. Okay? Louis has no problem with this. One family ruling two of the greatest Catholic countries in Europe, who is freaked out by this idea. England, tremendously freaked out by the idea of this, and so they start the War of the Spanish Succession. And France and Spain end up fighting England. No big surprise there. And they fight them to a draw. Nobody really wins. France and Spain agree that they will never unite the two thrones in the two countries. Philip does take the throne. So England wins in a sense that the thrones aren't united, but Spain and France win in that England didn't get to boss them around completely. The treaty that ends this is called the Treaty of Utrecht. And I want to take a minute to remind you about some royal family names that you need to be aware of and keep up with. Michael, do you need to stand up? In England, what was our royal family name? Tudor. In Spain, what was our royal family name? Habsburg. Whoops. Habsburg. And in France, anybody know? Starts with Henry IV, and it will be the only family name you have to know in this class. Bourbon. Bourbon is correct. Now, we've also talked about how people intermarry, right? They marry one another for treaties and alliances and stuff. So what do you suppose, how did Louis XIV, the King of France, how did his grandson end up being the heir to the Spanish throne? There is some marriage. And at that point, the family that rules Spain switches from Habsburg to Bourbon. This stuff will be on the final. Bells ring, whistles blow, stomping feet, jumping up and down. This stuff will be on the final. This is me making a big deal about this. Still, someone will go, it totally wasn't fair that we had to know the names of the royal families. I will hear that cry. Tough luck. All right, back to the levee. The ridiculousness. The levee means the rising. This is a ceremony to attend the king when he gets up in the morning. Okay. There is a practical reason for the nobility to want to be there. The closer you are in proximity to the king, the greater the chance you could have some influence over the king. Yes? Okay. Practically, nobles want to be there for that opportunity. They also want to be there to check him out. Make sure he's healthy, doing well. Did he have trouble getting out of bed? Is his color okay? Is he looking like he's gaining weight, losing weight? You know, any of that kind of stuff. Louis XIII had begun this. Louis XIV takes it to an extreme, and he uses it and the nobles' desire for social status. He uses it against them. It's beautiful. I need a king. Can I get a king? Come on up, Your Highness. Actually, aren't you Your Excellency, Cardinal Richelieu? Okay. For now, we have Louis. All right. So His Highness has just arisen from bed. What is the first thing you do in the morning? Most of you? What is one of the first things you do in the morning? What? You go to the bathroom. Yeah. It's a normal human thing. Well, Your Highness, I am one of the most honored nobles, and I really had to fight for this job. Here is your chamber pot. And he goes. And then I get to take the chamber pot, and you never turn your back on the king, and I get to carry it out. Ah! Exciting! That is a huge honor. Huge honor. I was this close to the king. Almost as big of an honor as the next two guys who approached the king. If you've ever helped a young child who's just been potty trained, one of the most difficult things about being potty trained is the cleanup. Okay? That's a difficult move, and sometimes they don't do a very thorough job. The very first time I ever babysat a kid, I heard, Miss Becky, I need help. And I walk into the bathroom. Kid completely bent over at the waist, hands on cheeks, spreading them. Oh, I'm supposed to wipe. Okay. Well, it takes two hands to spread them, so it takes two attendants to do this for the king. One to spread, one to clean the royal crevice. That would be beneath the king to do for himself. Now, we see the ridiculous and demeaning nature of this, right? But I got to be that close to the king and his bum. How very exciting, right? Louis gets this. He gets how ridiculous it is that he has manipulated all of these scheming nobles into wiping his hiney. And they are excited about it. They are fighting over it. I know. Then two more come up and they take his nightshirt off of him, and then somebody holds his pants for him to step into, and he can't be expected to button his own pants, so another one gets to come up and button up his pants for him. Oh my goodness, brush his hair, brush his teeth, wash his face, everything. Thank you, Your Highness. A whole line of nobles fighting over these opportunities. Every day. Every day. Louis has sucked their power out of them. They think they have power because they're close, because they're in proximity. You know, Your Highness, my province could use a little care and a little love right here. You do have that opportunity when you're next to the king. But it's also a little awkward to say, Just a minute more, Your Highness, I need to wipe again. Right? Right? Do you get the brilliance of this? He's laughing at them all the way. And there's nothing they can do about it. They may know how ridiculous they are, but it's the way the system is. There's a similar system for going to bed at night, for tucking him in. Okay? Brilliant dude, right? Okay. Do you suppose I would have made such a big deal about all the ways Louis took power away if it weren't on the quiz? See you tomorrow.